Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Council meeting of the 16th of June 2020. Apologise for the 5-minute delay in getting started, and I open the meeting at 5 minutes past 6 p.m. We have just still working through our hybrid model of council meetings where the majority of us are here in person, but we're still using Zoom. So thank you for your patience and welcome to members of the public gallery to this evening's meeting. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. In item 2, apologies members on leave of absence. I believe we do have Councillor Loden as an apology, with the possibility that he may be joining us at some point. So I'm just going to check with the Manager of Governance. If Councillor Loden does join the Zoom, could you just flag that and let us know that he's joined?
Through Mayor Cole, yes, I'll do that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go straight to public question time and receiving of public statements. But before I'll just check, do we still have we received any questions in writing this evening?
Through you, Mayor Cole, no, we haven't received any.
All right, great. Welcome members of the public gallery. Very nice to see you in person here tonight. As you know, you've all been here before, so there's no set order. Please just come up to the microphone. If you could state your name, the suburb in which you reside, and then speak for up to 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Dudley Meyer, Highgate. So the first item I want to speak on is 9.4, the built form policy. So I think this document's the worst document I've seen in 20 years of looking at policies at Vincent. It's far too long, it's confusing, it's complex, it unnecessarily repeats things that are in the R code, it increases red tape and it still contains mistakes. I did put in a submission, but I stopped developing the submission when frustration got the better of me. And I thought, why should I bother trying to improve this when the council and administration obviously thought it was good enough? I really think this policy is worthy of independent external review. And if I had to choose one word to describe the policy, I would say embarrassing. The second item is the arts grants in the Leederville Garden Trust grants. The COVID committee has approved disbursement of funds to the Leederville Gardens Trust Fund. They also had an item on tonight's committee agenda to disburse funds from the Percent for Arts Reserve for arts relief. I think it's strange that the decision on how to spend the Percent for Arts money went to a COVID committee rather than waiting 1 hour to present it to a full council meeting where all council members could participate and all council members could shoulder the responsibility. The thing that's consistent between the relevant reports to the COVID committee about these grants and the attachments to those reports is that they were made confidential. And the reason given is that reports may contain information that may be of commercial value. It's what's commonly called commercial in confidence. This reason seems to be used more and more in order to make things confidential. So I'd like to quote from a paper presented to a conference in 1999 by the Commonwealth Auditor General, Pat Barrett, which dealt with commercial in confidence. And I'm quoting, "The defence that papers were commercially sensitive and should not be released is overused by governments trying to avoid scrutiny and embarrassment and often represents arrogance of the first order." He then goes on to say, "The system requires the utmost transparency and direct accountability from its representatives, and lack of transparency and limiting the capacity to review decisions weakens our democracy." I now have some questions. First one, with regards to the lease of 246 Vincent Street, what would the total income be from the rent component, so that's excluding the parking payments? What would it be over a 10-year period if no incentive was involved? The initial payment was $754,800 and the rent increased by 3% per annum. The second question is, what is 40% of that amount? And the third question is, who performed due diligence on the lease proposal? The next question is, now that the lease for 246 Vincent Street has been finalised, will the administration make public the valuation that was included in attachment 6 of the item that went to the council meeting on the 10th of December 2019? If not, why not? And the last one is, what council workshops have been held since the 28th of April and what topics were discussed at each workshop? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hi, Andrew Main, North Perth. I wanted to speak on item 10.2 on the local long-term cycling network. Thanks to the elected members and staff for the opportunity to speak. Also thanks to the elected members that have responded to my emails on this issue over the last couple of weeks. Support the concept of consultation, obviously. I just wanted to make the point that if consultation is to occur, that consultation be a forum type setting, workshop, so that people can, exchange ideas, hear from others, because particularly with cycling, but not just cycling, but cycling related issues, people have different needs, they come from different backgrounds, they have different abilities, they have different ages and so on. So I think it's a great forum, a great topic to have a forum where we can share information and learn from others. It's good that the council is pushing back on the Hyde Park route, but I think there are other routes as well that are a bit perplexing, and I think the council should also consider going back to, or not supporting, or advising department that you don't support these. There's no route on Charles Street. Charles Street's a major route to get to various destinations. For some reason, the local cycling route NE1 has been changed, so that's no longer designated as a direct route north to south. The other major issue I think that needs to be considered is the Burke and View Street being a secondary route. I think there should be if you can find a quieter route that doesn't have as much traffic, vehicle traffic, then why don't we use that? And I know that I understand that the council officers were looking at the Claverton, Emerson, Richmond Street alignment as that major east-west route, but that now has changed to the Burke and View Street, which is a local distributor and not a pleasant place to drive. And from a cycling perspective, I want to ride on a road that, that is quiet as possible. And as a motorist, I don't really want to be driving down a road where I'm held up by cyclists, to be honest. So why don't we aim for routes that don't introduce that conflict? I have a whole range of others, but I don't really have any time. And I look forward to the discussion by council. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I hope you've seen this replacement page that has come out. It's, is it available? There is a replacement page provided by administration where they have updated their recommendation to council that deals with a number of the issues that council and community members have raised. Thank you. Come forward, Lindsay. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Cole and councillors of the City of Vincent. My name's Janine Lindsay from Ecologic Homes in Karrinyup. Once again, I'd like to thank you for the efforts you've made in gaining an understanding of our project. It's very much appreciated, and I'll keep this short. I know car parking is a large concern, and as previously discussed, we feel that parking in the setback is not only in line with the rest of the street, but we feel we're offering a better protected, more attractive option than is offered by most of the neighbourhood parking. I would also like to remind Council that according to the Residential Design Codes Volume 2 Apartments, Clause 3.9 car and bicycle parking design guidelines, there's 3.9.2 states parking requirements should be determined considering the proximity of the development to a centre and the availability of public parking or high frequency public transport services. Reducing car parking requirements may reduce car dependency and encourage walking, cycling and the use of public transport. 3.9.3, visitor parking may be reduced where there is adequate on-street parking or public parking in the vicinity of the development. And most importantly, 3.9.5, consideration may be given to the reduction of resident parking, including to 0 bays, subject to an assessment of the location, the likely current and future demand for parking spaces, and the likely impact on neighbouring land uses, whether it's suitable to allow the supply of fewer spaces. At a time like this, when the news is all about stimulating the economy and pushing through approvals, we'd just like to remind everyone we have been trying to get this through for over 14 months, trying to work with the planning department. Please, we implore the council to help us improve our wonderful City of Vincent by supporting a local City of Vincent developer to spend some money on a much needed improvement to a fast deteriorating, unattractive block of flats and create a diverse, appealing environment to live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. Any further speakers this evening? Okay, thank you very much for your comments this evening. Okay, so we have some responses to previous public questions taken on notice, and those are contained in the agenda papers. So that's item 3B. Applications for leave of absence. We do have one request, 4.1. Councillor Ashley Wallace is requesting leave from the 21st of July 2020 to the 28th of July 2020. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Hallett. All those in favour? I declare that request carried and approved. And also for noting item 4.2, at the Ordinary Council meeting held on the 11th of February 2020, Council did approve leave for Councillor Gontaszewski from the period 29th of June to the 4th of September 2020 inclusive, and Councillor Gontaszewski has requested that this leave of absence be cancelled. I know. Many people are in the same boat. We empathise. So yes, that doesn't need to be voted on, but thank you for noting that for the record. Okay, item 5, the receiving of petitions, deputations and presentations. We don't have any this evening. Item 6, confirmation of minutes. This is for the ordinary meeting of the 26th of May 2020. Could I please have a mover and seconder? Move Councillor Fotakis, seconded Councillor Gontaszewski. All those in favour? Declare the minutes carried. Announcements by the presiding member. Look, I would just make a few comments. I just wanted to briefly mention that the development plan for Haynes Street Reserve has now been released for community comment. There was a little bit of a hiatus there during COVID-19, and we're trying to get back on track with all of our consultations. If you recall, this has been a tricky situation where we are trying to return recreational land back to parkland, but over time and perhaps not wisely, we have had more built form appearing on this land, which culminated in a number of tenancies, including a very well-loved and popular local childcare centre, Kids Galore. So we have gone through quite a process in order to try to find the right balance between meeting the needs of those tenants, honouring the commitments that we have made to them, and also looking at having a longer term transitional arrangement with Kids Galore to ensure that that much loved childcare service can find their forever home and remain in the City of Vincent, which is the wish of the operator. And it's been quite an incredible experience to be able to come through this process with the support of the Attorney General to remain in breach of a deed of trust over this land for a 5-year period to ensure that that childcare centre does have time to relocate without disruption to their service, and that the city is able to move through a phased return to parkland as we're able to move tenants from that recreational land. This land was identified in our public open space strategy. It is a very unique block in that it's north facing, it's sizable, it's in a pocket where extra space and green space is needed. And now that we've moved through those very difficult issues, we're now at the point where we're taking this to the community to say, what would you like to see in this plan? And we have had some initial consultation. There's a draft and we're putting it out there for further comment. So it's great to see that. Then we hope that people will put their views forward. Also, just to note that in terms of our COVID and ongoing COVID response, I just thought I'd update that The city's teams have been out visiting businesses. So far, 233 businesses have been visited. We've seen Beatty Park Leisure Centre now open up 7 days a week with no bookings required for the swimming pool. We were told at the COVID meeting this evening that 800 people came through the doors today and that we have re-engaged 40 casuals back on deck. So that's very good news. Nowhere near full capacity, but we're definitely on the pathway there. We're continuing to close Leederville Village Square on the weekends. It will be closed this coming weekend, and there'll be a bit of a review of how that's working and whether the businesses feel that they're getting benefit from that and the community are responding to that, given that we are in winter and businesses can now house people possibly much more warmly inside their restaurants, cafes, etc. And to date, the COVID committee has dispersed funds to the Leederville Gardens Trust funds to 6 public benevolent institutions: People Who Care, St Vincent de Paul, RUA, Uniting WA, YMCA, Food Bank, and tonight the first tranche of Arts Relief has been awarded also. I just also want to note that tonight we do have quite a significant report on the agenda, and I won't talk to it now because I will pull it forward for discussion, but we are adopting our draft rate setting statement this evening for advertising, and that is quite an important one for this evening. So that's all from me for now, and we'll continue to move forward with the agenda, and that is taking us to declarations of interest. So over to you, CEO.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole, I've received 2 declarations of interest, which are identical to the ones received last week for the council briefing session. The first being in relation to item 8.1 from Councillor Castle, noting that it's an impartiality disclosure of interest affecting financial and proximity, the extent of the interest being that Councillor Castle has noted that the Friends of Anzac Cottage are an ongoing client of Councillor Castle's business. Councillor Castle is not seeking approval to participate in the debate or to remain in the chambers. And the second declaration of interest is from Councillor Toppelberg in relation to item 5.4 on planning policy 7.1.1 built form. The extent of the interest being that Councillor Toppelberg's family own a property at 346 to 352 William Street within the area subject to William Street guidelines, and Councillor Toppelberg is requesting council grant approval to participate in the debate.
Okay, we do have a request from Councillor Toppelberg to seek our approval to participate in the debate in relation to item 9.4, where he does have a financial interest on part of the motion. Is anyone prepared to move and second that to support that request, or do you have any questions in relation to this request? You're moving it, okay. Seconded by Councillor Wallace. Any comments or questions?
Just that I'm satisfied that Councillor Toppelberg can take part in the debate without impacting on anyone else's interest.
Councillor Wallace. Okay, any comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare that carried and request granted. Okay, so that then just leaves us to pull forward items that we wish to debate that have not already been raised by members of the public gallery. So just to recap, they were items 9.4, 10.2, 9.2. We will need to pull out 9.4 and 11.1 where financial interests have been declared. And we do have 2 absolute majority decisions on 12.1 and 12.3. So in addition to those items, Councillor Hallett, is there anything you wish to bring forward?
Just 11.5.
Thank you. Councillor Castle, Councillor Wallace, Councillor Fotakis, Councillor Smith, Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. 9.3, thank you.
You don't wish to bring forward 9.4? I don't. Oh, it's been brought up. Apologies. Councillor Konchevsky? No. Look, I would also just like to just very briefly bring forward 9.1. And I would also like to bring forward 11.5. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hallett, you've already done that. I think that's it. Okay. Sorry, I just also want to bring forward 12.2. Apologies. Yep, so look, I do just want to draw your attention to a late item, which I don't have on my paper version. I'll just quickly bring up. There's a late item that's just for noting. Just wanted to draw your attention to it to make sure you'd seen it before deciding whether you wish to bring it out or move on block.
Elected member representation.
So item 15.1, representation on committees and public bodies. Not actually showing up on my docs on tap. Do you have a written version?
We can put it on the screen.
Through you, Mayor Cole, would you like me to read it out? Or
That
we
would
can
be
share it
wonderful,
on-
thank you.
So under 15, item 15, representation on committees and public bodies, we've noted item 15.1, representation to the Climate Emergency Australia Strategic Advisory Group. Councillor Hallett has nominated to the Climate Emergency Australia Strategic Advisory Group. Councillor Hallett's nomination has been supported by Councillor Kate Driver of the Shire of Mundaring and Councillor Brad Pettit of the City of Fremantle. And the recommendation is that Council notes Councillor Hallett's nomination to the Climate Emergency Australia Strategic Advisory Group.
Does anyone wish to bring that forward for debate? Okay, we'll add that to the on-block items. Thank you very much, Manager.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I could read out the items that would be proposed to be moved on block, which include items 10.1, items 11.2, 11.3 and 11.4, and items 12.4, 12.5, 12.6 and 15.1.
Actually, I don't need to bring out 12.2 unless anybody else wishes to discuss the corporate business plan. Okay, I'll just add that one into on-block items too.
Thanks. And item 12.2. And I'll just wait for confirmation from our minutes secretary that we've got them. That's
Okay, can I please have a mover and seconder for the on-block items? Move Councillor Castle, seconded Councillor Hallett. All those in favour? Declaring the on-block items carried. Thank you. So, yes, so look, normally we would deal with these items in the order in which they're raised by members of the public gallery, but I'm noting that the members in the public gallery that remain did speak third, but they are still here. So we'll go to item 9.2 first, which is number 17 Florence Street, West Perth, proposed 2 grouped dwellings and alterations and additions to 8 existing multiple dwellings. So noting that we have an officer recommendation before us for refusal, and we also have an alternate on the move. So can I call for a mover and seconder of the officer recommendation? Move Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I will speak to it because it's me. I have requested the alternative be put forward, but I guess I need to speak to why so that the alternative has a chance to be considered. I accept the officer's assessment against the planning framework and understand the reasons that it's been recommended for refusal. I think that in the context of the site, the existing dwelling, the car parking proposed, the conditions that are able to be proposed, and the clear attempt to not only retain the existing built form but actually provide improved amenity, it's near on impossible to provide deemed to comply or to meet the deemed to comply requirements for things such as stores, etc. I think the location of the car parking can be dealt with via conditions, and I'm happy to do so. I think that the overall aesthetic of the built form from the street level will be vastly improved, and the two group dwellings to the rear, given the nature of the site, the size of it, it is respectful of the limitation regarding multiple dwellings. And I think if you look at the site context just as a site worthy to be demolished, and that size site with its zoning be considered, the idea that it couldn't accommodate multiple dwellings means you would get a far more dense and imposing built form outcome on the site than what is proposed. So I'm comfortable with conditions to, I'm not of a mind to refuse the application, and will propose the alternative on what's been designated as mauve or light lilac, depending on which colour school you went to, but happy to propose that should the officer recommendation not be successful.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace, did you have any comments? Any comments in relation to the proposal before us? Look, I agree that in terms of the assessments against the current planning framework, it's very difficult, and there are definitely aspects to the proposal that are problematic, but we are dealing with a building that is 50 plus years old, obviously not of a design that would wash under Design WA or our own planning framework. You know, has quite significant limitations in terms of its original design. And I do think that we do need to be mindful of the fact this is retrofitting, and overall, I think that there is an offer, a proposal on the table that is a better outcome for what is there. I have been to the site 2 times and met with the applicants, which will be fully disclosed on the developer contact register. And it is something that really does need work, and I'm believe that what has been presented to us is a better outcome for those that live at the development, as well as those who are in the neighbourhood and walk by the development and live across from it, etc. So whilst there are things here that would be fantastic to improve, we are dealing with an existing built form, and I can understand the intent to improve the living conditions of the existing multi-dwellings as well as additional group dwellings. Obviously, there were some problems around group dwellings versus multi-dwellings, and I believe that has now been resolved, and that was a bit of a sticking point in terms of the application moving forward, and appreciate that that has now been resolved. So if the alternate comes forward, I'd be more inclined to support an approval rather than a refusal. Are there any further comments? Councillor Hallett?
Just a question, I guess, around process for the applicants. Obviously, if we refused it by accepting the officer recommendation, they would have access to go to SAT to appeal that. Because there's a alternate on the table, but it's not been put in the report, I'm just curious as to whether the conditions and things in there are something that we're aware that the applicants would be able to deliver on, and if we approved it with these, is it open for the applicant to still appeal any of those conditions and that kind of thing?
I'll see if Mr. J. Naidu is here to answer these questions.
I'm here through you, Mayor Cole.
Thank you.
Yes, ultimately it's available to the applicant to appeal to the SAT, not only a decision, but also the terms of that decision, including conditions. So it would be available to the applicant to appeal or contest any condition that was imposed in an alternate approval. Now, in saying that, the conditions ultimately can be achieved and have been structured in a way where it could be reasonably achieved on this site. So I don't see any of them being of particular issue to deliver. That would be my feedback, but ultimately the option is there for the applicant to appeal any conditions imposed by council should you approve this item tonight.
Manager, just in relation to some of the conditions there, I thought that there was an awareness from the applicant about some of those conditions being considered. I'm not sure whether that was through commentary at the council briefing last Tuesday or whether you've had an opportunity to discuss the conditions in the alternate with the applicant.
Through you, Mayor Cole, the applicant has not reviewed all of the conditions before you in the alternate. However, there were some items flagged at the briefing session last week, together with the on-site meeting that I was also in attendance yesterday, and the non-standard conditions specific to this particular site and the constraints of this proposal were flagged, which includes the car bay number 2. You'll see that in the alternate condition number 6.1, car bay number 2, adjacent to unit number 1 being designated for the exclusive use of that particular unit to promote and to protect the privacy of those occupants. So items such as that were flagged, and the applicant at that time did not object to that.
Okay, yes, I would agree with that, being at the site meeting, that some of these conditions were raised, but I note that the whole alternate recommendation hasn't been discussed with the applicant. Do you have any further questions, Councillor Hallett? Okay, does anyone have any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll put the officer recommendation to refuse the development application. All those in favour? All those against? I declare that lost. Is there an alternate motion to be put?
Just, do we need to provide reasons for that? I think we do, which is we believe it's approvable, but I think we need to provide reasons.
Oh, would you like to as the mover?
We believe that the application is approvable with conditions.
Well, if we look at your alternate text here, it says the application warrants development approval as the proposal is consistent with the city's built form policy and state planning policy 7.3 residential design codes of WA volume 2 apartments resulting in a positive built form outcome.
Those words were put into my mouth, but sure.
Or do you agree? Are they your words?
They're not, but that is ultimately what voting for it would say. So yes,
Okay.
I'm happy for that to be the
All
reason.
right, thank
and I'm
you.
happy also
There
to
you go.
move the motion on the move.
Lilac, if you want it to be. Okay, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Fotakis, thank you.
Okay, won't be long. I'll just mention some of the conditions. So most of the conditions are standard conditions that effectively say it needs to be built as designed. There's a couple relating to landscaping, one of which is landscaping condition 2.1 part 3 or dot point 3, the proposed tree immediately to the west of the visitors' bays being a minimum of 200 litres, or the inclusion of an additional landscaping treatment to screen the visitors' bay when viewed from the street to the city's satisfaction. That just relates to the, there was some discussion. I did consider proposing removal of the visitors' bay, but ultimately, given the current nature of the site and the street, and there is a car parking shortfall, I felt that that was an appropriate outcome, that bay should still be allowed, but that screening, that the vegetation adjacent to the street would at least conceal the fact that there was 3 car bays and one immediately adjacent to it in the front setback. The other conditions that are particular, as Mr. Naidu mentioned, condition 6.1, that car bay 2 being designated for the exclusive use of Unit 1. There are some units that won't be necessarily allocated a bay, but this effectively allows that sliding door and that interface between that car bay, the issues of security, otherwise to not be an issue because it allocates that to the bay. The other one that was is an advice note, but relates to so advice note 10, which relates to car parking permits. So I did confirm that currently there are no car parking permits allocated, and because the property that currently exists predates our policy, the current occupants would otherwise be entitled to up to 2 permits. And my concern was that we would end up potentially with these bays on there plus up to 16 16 permits, which would have a significant impact on the street. But I think by being upfront with the applicant, and whilst we established legally it can't be a condition of approval, but noting it as an advice note that the city would not consider it, I think is, that was a critical element for me. And the only other thing I'll mention is that on the basis of the proposed landscaping to the grass pavers being called turkey tangle frog fruit, that alone should probably or possibly warrant approval. Haven't seen that before, but look forward to seeing the turkey tangle frog fruit thriving into the future.
Great. Okay, Councillor Fotakis.
I'll just be brief. I think when you look at these applications and just apply them in black and white, and I think, you know, with respect to the staff, that's the role that they have. It's one of, I suppose, the benefits of being in our position at council is we do have the ability to look outside that and take a broader look and have an outcome that I believe is an improvement on the site. Is it, if it was looking at it as a brand new development, does it tick all of the boxes? Probably not, but we're not. We're looking at a retrofit, and I think these retrofit developments are particularly difficult. I have some empathy with the building being over 50 years old. I know how difficult it is to compete with new and young. Not that that's a planning consideration. So I think the allocation of Carbe 2 does alleviate some of those concerns we had with privacy for Unit 1. So that attributing that up to lot number 1, I think deals with that and removes, I suppose, not only those concerns for privacy, but any of those noise issues that coming and going on that Carbe can cap with that unit. So I'm very happy to support the alternate.
Thank you, Councillor Fotakis. Any further comments or questions? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. Congratulations. Okay, so we'll now go to the other items raised by members in the public gallery this evening. So 9.4 is next, outcomes of advertising amendment number 2 to local planning policy number 7.1.1 built form, appendix number 16 design guidelines for Perth, and appendix number 18 design guidelines for William Street. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Gondaszewski. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I don't think that we're at the point of calling. There's a few Vincent policies that I think warrant some review and some attention, but I don't think that I would put them in the embarrassing stage. But, you know, maybe some of the really old ones, but I think that there's been an approach taken with this document and an attempt to format it in a manner that is going to make it useful, perhaps for people that are in a for our community that will not necessarily be dealing with the full policy at any one time, that may be just dealing with the bits that they need. Yeah, and so as a result, you know, there may be some repetition and there may be some extended length, but I think we need to continue to work on our public-facing documents with a view to try and making them more useful to end users, and I think that's this is an attempt at that. And I'm also pleased. So I'm pleased to support that element of the policy design, and I think that one of the things that I've seen since we've been at Vincent is that this is a consistently evolving and iterative policy. I'm pleased to see that. I think that too often things do, you know, sit on the shelf, and, you know, you might do these wholesale, you know, huge wholesale revisions, you know, once every 5 to 8 to 10 years, because often a couple of years after they're due to be done. But so I'm pleased to see this come back to us, and I'm happy to support the officer recommendation. Endorsing administration's responses to submissions. I can't say that I see a great deal of wholesale change to the document as a result of the comments received during advertising, but I do note that there has been addressed through the reporting, and I'm pleased to see the amendments coming forward that I think we will see as a result. We will see some demonstrable change in the way that we're able to assess and consider planning applications coming before us in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Councillor Wallace? Councillors, any comments? Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you. I will make comment because I'm not participating in the debate, so I'll make comment, in the vote, so I will make some comments and then depart. I think that the policy, the built form policy, I go back to its first iteration, which I didn't vote for at the time because of the complexity of the document, and I think that we've gone in some ways down a path to mirror some of the existing planning documentation that exists at a broader level, which to me results in a policy that is written effectively for planners and for decision makers, not for the average property owner or person who wants to consider what to do with a piece of land that they own or occupy. I think that it's very difficult if you don't have industry knowledge or assistance to be able to navigate your way through it. I think if you were to just simply look and say, my neighbour came and told me that they want to build 1.4 metres from my boundary, can they do that? This is a very, very difficult document to be able to work out whether that is something that they can or can't do. And I think that it's, I can see the genesis of that and understand how that's arisen, particularly in the approvals environment and how the process by which the assessment and ultimately the decision makers have to go through, and what and particularly with the apartment guidelines when you get to larger developments, and the way that that's written in the performance criteria as a pathway, so that the deemed to comply is a bit easier. But I think ultimately the document presents something that will require most landowners or most people dealing with the city to require assistance in order to be able to either find the answers they want or to be able to proceed with development. And I don't know that that's the intent with some of the smaller scale developments. I think if we're talking about single dwellings in particular, or smaller scale development, I think that there's a lot more work that we can do to make that more accessible. That said, I accept that as a broad document, it does try and cover everything. I made some comment last week about the need where it does refer to or repeat what exists in the art codes to provide links so that those are easily accessible. But I guess I'll give you a simple context. I've gone through a process recently of submitting a DA, and in order to provide justification documentation in terms of the departures for the proposal that I submitted, I found it extremely difficult to do so in terms of the built form policy, and referred back to the R codes, and essentially I'm waiting for the city to come back to advise of how those may or may not be viewed in terms of the built form policy. And I accept that it is a fair criticism that if I'm not able to easily get that information, that wouldn't be easy for community. But ultimately, principally when we see planning matters coming before council, it's not usually submitted by the layperson. It's usually submitted by their builder, their draftsperson, their planning consultant, or as you get to larger developers, there's obviously other consultancies involved. So I think the document is extremely long. It is extremely complex, but I don't think that those are necessarily criticisms. I think those are just realities of how this has evolved. And I think the work that we need in order to make the simple side of our planning for simple matters simpler for people is something that can be done either in parallel or next to. I don't necessarily think that we have to have a one size fits all, because that has resulted in 155 odd pages of document, which is exactly what we tried to undo when we first came up with the idea of a single policy. So that's my comments.
Thank you, council members. I will just go to the manager of policy in place because the issue of the length of document has been raised a number of times, but I just wanted to perhaps step back to December 2016 when this policy was adopted. And Manager, could you remind me how many planning policies this one policy replaced at the time?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole, I think we replaced 19 local planning policies with...
Sorry, Manager, is there any way we can maybe get you to speak closer to your microphone, perhaps? It's a little bit...
Is that better?
A little bit.
Sorry, is that better?
That's quieter. I think you just...
Apologies. Can you hear me now?
It's a little, not the best. Give it. The answer was 19.
19.
Yes, that's good. Yes, 19. So 19 planning policies were replaced. So in terms of what's embarrassing, you know, this was actually an effort to bring all of our, well, not every planning policy, but the bulk of planning policies into one document. And I do think that the attempt has then been to sort of make this a bit of a one-stop shop so that it sort of provides linkages back and mentions every, you know, planning document that you need to refer to. So it is a long document. And I think the attempt to put it into the volumes to match the state planning framework is really good. And I think that now that we've sort of got it into the one document and we've got it into the volumes, then you can start to kind of really look at whether you need to start, you know, reducing it back again to make it as user-friendly as possible. But I think that we do need to acknowledge the journey of where we've come from and why this is a long document. Manager, is there anything else? There have been a few comments. Is there anything else that you wanted to respond to?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor Cole, I just wanted to point out, hopefully you can hear me okay. I just wanted to point out that any one person using the policy, although it's over 100 or so pages, someone would only actually have to use between 20 and 30 pages for any application that's being lodged. So although it does appear really lengthy because it is a sort of one-stop shop for development at the City of Vincent, there's only a small portion of the policy that would be used at any one time.
Yes, thank you very much, Manager, and thanks for your efforts. And it's fantastic to see some of the clarifications come through. As we said when we adopted it back in December 2016, this is a living document, and the intent was to see how it worked, and that as issues came up that needed clarification, we would amend it in the same way we'd amend a scheme, but hopefully a lot more quickly. And so it's really good to see that we're dealing with issues such as the garage door width, which has been something that has become a bit of an issue through planning development applications that we've been seeing. So that's really good, and I'm very happy to support this and continue to treat it as a living document that can be continuously reviewed and improved as we go. Any further comments? Councillor Hallett.
Just a question, I guess, just in relation to it being a one-stop shop. Obviously, there are different audiences that use policies documents because it's used by administration and us in governance as well as applicants. I'm just wondering if there's plans for, and this isn't a request to do so, but plans for, I guess, supporting documents that can be used for community to interpret or engage with the policy at all?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's definitely the intent. Our statutory planning team has been developing a number of checklists and supporting documentation to assist anyone who's lodging an application with the city. And so we'll continue to evolve those, in particular once the policy is approved or determined by council. Then we can look to include information sheets and all of the information that's in the policy in a user-friendly format for the community. And it certainly has been challenging to try and ensure that the document withstands the statutory planning and state administrative tribunal process, while also making it really user-friendly for any person who is wanting to do development in the city. So I think running those things in parallel, like Councillor Toppelberg has previously mentioned, is perhaps where we've landed.
Thank you, Manager. Are there any further comments or questions? Okay, noting that Councillor Toppelberg has left the room for the vote, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried by everyone. No one voting against. Thank you. Okay, the last item raised by a member of the public gallery this evening was item 10.2, Department of Transport long-term cycle network endorsement, and just wanted to draw your attention to this page white with the red on it. I've just clarified with the CEO that this is a replacement page from administration, so this forms administration's recommendation to council. So this is what you would be moving and seconding and debating. That one can, I think that was an earlier version that can go in the bin. This is what the CEO informs me. It's redundant. Yep. So it's the one with the red text. Okay. Once you've had a chance to read that, I'll be happy to have a mover and seconder. Move Councillor Toppelberg, seconded Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. The decision-making side of this is actually a bit strange. The principle of it is quite simple for me, but there's been a lot of conversation back and forth since last week between the department, our staff, elected members, and some other interested parties. My understanding, and perhaps I'll ask you, CEO, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that the deadline for response to the Department of Transport for endorsement of the plan is fixed, and they have indicated that any local governments that do not endorse the plan by that time will not be eligible to receive funding for the plan going forward. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor Cole, yes, that's the advice we've received, and it's the advice that have gone to all the relevant local governments. And the Executive Director can correct me, but the applications for funding are for a 2-year period. And just to clarify the intent of our replacement page, we didn't put this in writing, but we'd certainly still submit our grant funding applications, and would still hope that they're assessed. And there would be some risk given there might be some uncertainty around the exact nature of the long-term cycle network, but we already have an indication that we can work with the department on an alternative route around Hyde Park as opposed to through Hyde Park, and we'd still hope that our funding requests are assessed on merit, but that those funding requests are considered by an independent panel, and they do take into consideration whether or not council has endorsed the long-term cycle network as proposed. There is my view is a bit of a chicken and egg between some councils who have endorsed and are doing community consultation. The proposal here, or the revised language in the recommendation, is to support in principle, subject to the agreement with Transport on the Hyde Park route, as well as the fact that we would undertake community consultation following council's consideration tonight.
Thank you. So a few things. First of all, just in response to the question from the gallery earlier, the Burke Street, View Street route is something that I know that there is ongoing work. The question about Charles Street, I think we just need to be honest. There is no chance of anything other than a bus superhighway going down Charles Street, and Main Roads Department of Transport will defend that. And that's been through successive governments, is my understanding as well. So at local level, there's almost there's little or no chance of influencing that view of what Charles Street is currently and potentially could be. There's been quite a bit of talk about the road widening actually being enacted in the foreseeable future, whilst it's not in their imminent plans, which means I think they said not in the next 2 to 3 years. It's certainly something that's been discussed, and the idea that it would include cycling infrastructure is something that is at odds with what else they have planned for it. So whilst it might be on a map and in practical sense an ideal route, it's certainly not something that Transport in this state is considering. In terms of, as I said, as a decision maker, so there's been discussions about Norfolk Street as a connection, loose connection, and if you take outside of Vincent, so roughly from Edith Cowan University and getting through into the existing network and to the CBD in some way, that's been going on for many years. The first time that I understood that William Street, anywhere north of Bulwer Street, was being considered as a primary route was when I saw it in a map appearing in the briefing agenda. That has been clearly something that's been discussed for a period of time, but for me, the comments last week in the discussion around Hyde Park isn't just about removing Hyde Park and making an odd dog leg from the Norfolk Street route. It actually relates to the best spending of funding, and perhaps if William Street, if the idea is to be able to get people from ECU to the city, there are easy routes down from ECU, Walcott Street, Venn Street, Monmouth Street, and then straight on to William Street. And I'd rather see, personally, some of that funding directed towards making an improved and better landscape or a better functioning and sooner realisation of infrastructure on William Street, rather than having a primary and secondary route so close to each other just because they happen to both be viewed as appropriate for bike infrastructure. So what is proposed condition 2.2, I would like to see not just result in a potential dogleg around Hyde Park, either down Throstle or the other way up Vincent Street and connecting onto William, but actually looking at that whole route and whether Norfolk Street actually needs to be designated as a cycling route. I'm sure Vincent would be able to consider some treatments to Norfolk Street which would make it more bike friendly, but not necessarily having to be a designated route. As it's written, I think that it gives council the opportunity to do what it intended to do, and based on the discussion and questions last week, which is to be able to go and consult with the community. I think it would take a brave state to turn around and say, no, you didn't endorse it on the night and therefore you've missed the deadline and we won't be funding. I think we are effectively, we're adjacent to the CBD. We have been at the forefront of cycling infrastructure from a local government perspective, and spending well beyond our size in terms of delivering those outcomes for the community and for the broader network. And I think it would be a gross injustice if the state was to frown upon technicalities of dates, because we simply wanted to go and make sure that what we were voting on reflected the views of our community. So I am comfortable with the revised recommendation and will support it. I do think there is a key difference in the word supports in principle and endorses, because I think that is supporting the idea of the network and having that hierarchy of roads and then working with the community to define exactly what we think they should be, and look forward to seeing those key elements funded in the near future.
Thank you, Councillor Toppelberg. Councillor Castle, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I actually have a question following on from the comment Councillor Toppelberg just made around the particular difference between endorsement and supporting in principle, and what the practical difference is, as well as the semantic difference. I guess my question is, because it appears that the word endorsement is the trigger for funding, is it open to us to endorse it subject to consultation? Would that have the effect of securing that access to funding, but still taking that opportunity to consult with the community, which has been clear from discussions throughout the week is something that council really values?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I'm looking on the Zoom screen of the Executive Director, but I would certainly say the word endorse parallels or mirrors the request or the wording from the Department of Transport. I think it's probably semantics between support and endorse, but I think endorse would be much closer to what the Department of Transport would like, even though we've noted that there's a couple of subject twos in the alternate language in front of council.
Through you, Michael, if I can add something, I think to answer the question, the only way to be 100% sure that we'll be eligible to apply for funding is to endorse the plan, that's the wording that they've given us, by the 16th of July this year. That's the only way that we can 100% guarantee we'll have access to funding. And to add a little bit, because there was some discussion earlier, the funding next year is already secured, so we already have some funding next year that was offered to us this year. So we'd be applying early next financial year for projects the year after. And one of the projects is to review the existing bike plan. So we'd apply to them for funding to do that. And it's 50-50 funding.
So I guess I still have the question is what would be the effect of us endorsing the plan subject to the clauses in 2.1 and 2.2? Would that satisfy both requirements?
I guess I can only repeat my previous answer, which is the only way to 100% guarantee that we're eligible to apply for funding. This is what the DOT have told us, is to endorse the plan by the 16th. So I would suggest that subject to some other things, that doesn't happen before the 16th of July, means that, that plan wouldn't be endorsed by the 16th of July. If you look.
Does that imply unconditional endorsement?
I believe so. And from looking at what other local governments are doing, they appear to be endorsing the plan and then carrying out public consultation, which they'll feed back to the Department of Transport.
I don't believe you can endorse something and then genuinely consult on it.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to ascertain. I have found this item particularly tricky because we are trying to squeeze our normal practices into an unreasonable time frame with the threat of no funding hanging over our heads. A further question I have is that this is a long-term cycle network. Is there a period of time attached to it, or is it anticipated to be a rolling live document in perpetuity?
So, Michael, it's a live document that will, I can't remember the exact date that it's meant to end, but the idea is it will guide infrastructure at least over the next 10 years. And it's related to the Perth and Peel plan. Sorry, I'm looking for that in the report. That's actually listed there. So, but it hasn't got the date, but it is related to the Perth and Peel plan, which does have a long-term outlook.
So it may be a 10-year plan, however, the time limits for endorsement only relate to the next 2 years of funding, is that correct?
So, Michael, well, we apply for funding on an annual basis. And so I suppose if we were to endorse a plan after the 16th of July, there may be opportunity to apply for funding in future years. But we would normally be applying early next financial year for the year after next, if that makes sense. So if the question, sorry if I had a bit more, if the question is, does that mean we'll never receive funding again? I'm not sure that the answer to that is yes, but certainly in the next window, we wouldn't, they're telling us we wouldn't be eligible to apply for funding. So there is a risk attached to that.
Can I move an amendment, please, Mayor Cole?
Sure.
So it would be, so 6 would become 7. This becomes a new 6. So it says, it would say, requests the Mayor to write to the Minister of Transport to inform her of the Council's decision and reason for withholding endorsement pending the outcomes of community consultation. Sorry, look, I'll is someone typing? So request the Mayor to write to the Minister for Transport to inform her of the Council's decision and reason for withholding endorsement of the plan pending the outcomes of community consultation. And I'll just ask the CEO if we were to add a further clause to that that says commits to providing a final comment on the plan no later than August 2020. Is that possible?
I might just ask the Executive Director to comment on the consultation timeframe. It's usually 21 days would be our minimum for something like that.
Yes, we might call us quite ambitious with the current workload we have, and you're right, the CEO is correct, the 21-day timescale we normally use. I also noticed the question from the public gallery about forums. So it does depend as well on what form and format the consultation will take place. If it was we advertise and use EHQ and open up for comment, that's relatively easy. But if we were to run forums more detailed, we would need some support, and that would make that target even more ambitious. So I couldn't guarantee that.
So just a question then. So if there is an existing submission for funding which is going in for this financial year regardless, so there won't be any change to any of our submissions, so it would only be at the behest of the department or ultimately the minister to accept our endorsement late. So would the ordinary council meeting of the 15th of September be sufficient time? It was a further month away, so that's 1 day short of 3 months from today.
Again, through you, Michael, I think it would depend on exactly what that consultation involved, bearing in mind the question from the public gallery.
Okay, so the wording of 6 would be request the Mayor to write to the Minister for Transport to inform her of the Council's decision and the reasons for withholding endorsement of the plan pending the outcomes. Okay, I'm happy to do that. So the reasons for, so get rid of the words withholding endorsement, reasons for supporting the plan in principle pending the outcome of community consultation, and will provide a further council decision no later than September 2020.
Personally, I think 2 months away is too long, but no later than, okay. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded by Councillor Wallace. Do you wish to speak to it?
I think it's the idea that we're being told by people within the department, unless we do this by this date, that we're not going to qualify for funding when we are the most bike-friendly local government in the state. And the issues are not semantics, but they are of key concern to our community. And all we've asked for as a council is the time to go to our community and discuss it with them. I think that that's worth fighting for. And if we're being told it's a risk, we should be mitigating our risk. And the easiest way is to go straight to the top and to ask the Minister to understand that.
Thank you. Councillor Wallace.
Yeah, I support the amendment from Councillor Tuppelberg. I guess I had a question that's related to it around 2.1, which is that it's suggested by admin that we're going to undertake consultation. I just wondered what the consequences of that were really, aside from providing it, I guess, as a report sitting beside the long-term cycle network as it stands. Like, is there an opportunity for revision of the network after consultation? Or was the intent just to provide the results of consultation to Department of Transport, who I presume won't do much to act upon them?
So you might call it this one? Yeah. I imagine that we would provide the results to the Department of Transport. I think the trickier area to talk about is if, based on the consultation, Council wishes to make further amendments to the plan. So if we were to then in August or September go back to the DOT and say we'll endorse the plan subject to further changes, in other words, not just Hyde Park, then I don't know what the outcome of that would be. But certainly if we just gave the consultation feedback back to them, they would happily receive it. They've told me that, and consider it.
Ultimately, this is a Department of Transport plan, so we can provide feedback, and whether what they do with it will ultimately be up to the Department of Transport. Any further comments or questions on the amendment?
Sorry, just the reason for the amendment is to clearly explain council's decision, not as written on screen.
What do I want to ask? Okay, all right, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Declare it carried unanimously. We're back to the substantive. Are there any further comments? You have spoken,
I
so
have
is this
only
a question?
asked questions.
Have you?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
I will support this recommendation as written. I'm not happy about the position that we've been put in. However, on balance, the need and importance of us going to consultation with our community is more important than rushing to endorsement in order to secure that funding. And I hope that Councillor Toppelberg's view of how this will play out is correct, and that the department will see reason. So yeah, I'll support this.
Thank you. Councillor Gonchevsky.
Just wanted to ask the questions that I asked earlier via email in relation to the process to date. So through you, Mayor Cole, to the Executive Director of Infrastructure and Environment. Can you just, I understand that the Department of Transport provided public notice that they were going to be consulting on a long-term cycle network back in 2018. You've advised that I believe that there was a meeting in July 2019, but I just wanted to check when the city first became aware that the Department of Transport was going to be consulting on a long-term cycle network.
Through you, Mayor Cole, I believe it was August 2018. Where they were looking to review the 2016 plan.
Okay. Oh God. And you've advised that the Department of Transport conducted engagement with local governments in groups, and that the city was one of the last groups consulted. Which other local governments, if you're aware, are in our group? And when did the first round of consultation with the first group commence?
Through my call, I don't know when the first round of consultation began with the first group, but I know that the other councils in our group were the town of Bassendean, the city of Bayswater, the town of Cambridge, the city of Joondalup, the Shire of Mundaring, the city of South Perth, the city of Stirling, the city of Swan, and the city of Wanneroo. So their councils received the plan, the final draft, the same time as we did.
When did the Department of Transport first engage with city officers on the long-term cycle network?
So I believe we had two meetings with the department, one in September 2018 and one in July 2019.
And in the September 2018 meeting, what was discussed?
Through you, Mayor Cole, I couldn't, I'd have to take that on notice. I couldn't give you an answer to that.
So is the sum total of engagement that the city has had with the Department of Transport, is it the two meetings?
Through you, Mayor Cole, that's the information I got, that we had two face-to-face meetings with them.
And has the city provided any written feedback to the Department of Transport since they've been engaging on the long-term cycle network?
Through my call, I'd need to review that and take that on notice. I'm not exactly sure if anything was done in writing.
You've advised that the draft long-term cycle network was expected in April 2020 and provided in May 2020 for endorsement by 16 July. At any point in the meetings or other communications, did the Department of Transport communicate a timeline for consultation and provision of the draft long-term cycle network?
Through my call, I need to take that one on notice. If we go back to Councillor Gonchevsky's original question, that's why I've not responded to the email, because I've not got all the answers as yet. I've got some of the answers, so I need to take that one on notice.
And can you advise or confirm for me that as part of the discussions in preparation for next year's budget, that routes the city is considering applying for funding for in the next financial year?
So through you, Michael, we already have funding secured for next financial year. We have secured, so this is 50-50 funding. We've secured 15,000 for the design of Scarborough Beach Road Cycle Link, which is from Brady Street to Glendalough Station. We've got an offer funding for 50,000 for the design of a bike-friendly installation from Vincent Street via Ethel, Chelmsford, Norfolk, Raglan to William Street. So that's design only. We have an offer funding of 300,000 for the Florence, Strathcona, Golding Streets Safe Active Street project, which is the next connection. So those are the offers of funding we have and appear in next year's budget.
But what this is hinging on is the ability of the city to put in an application next year for funding for the following year. Is that correct?
That's correct. Through you, Michael, is correct. So if you look at some of those designs that we'll be doing next year, based on the design, we'd then be looking to apply for funding for the following year to construct. So the design would include costing. So additional to applying for construction of some of those and possibly designs for other projects as well, the year after next. We're aiming to apply for $60,000 to develop the new City of Vincent bike plan, which is due for renewal year after next.
And so previously you'd advised that the contingency around funding was to do with the delivery of bike infrastructure on the routes in the long-term cycle network, and you've since advised tonight that you believe that it is essentially any bike-related funding from the Department of Transport, including the preparation, support for the preparation and consultation on a new bike plan that would be potentially impacted.
Yeah, through you, Michael. So they've traditionally funded design in 1 year and construction the following year, provided they accept the design and the costings, etc. That's the traditional way of doing it. But yeah, they certainly verbally told us that they would fund the development of the new bike plan, which otherwise we'd have to fund ourselves, and we need some external help, so it would cost us money.
Thank you. And can I just check, just to confirm that in any time between your first meeting in September 2018 and the release of the briefing notes for the release of the briefing agenda for this meeting, the only engagement that occurred was between Department of Transport officers and city administration representatives. There was no engagement with elected members, and there was no engagement with, for example, advisory group members?
Through my call, to my knowledge, that's correct. There was no other engagement. It was just a technical discussion between the administration and the department.
And just one question, in terms of the review that was undertaken by the city officers, was that undertaken by representatives of infrastructure and environment? Was input received from any of the officers that perhaps are familiar with our broader planning and our planning scheme and the land use that we identify along some of these cycle routes that may impact the ability for certain things to, certain types of cycling infrastructure to be implemented?
Yeah, so through McCall, other departments were involved, so strategy and development were involved because they are responsible for developing the integrated transport strategy, so that I know they were definitely involved.
Okay, thank you for that information. I will support the recommendation as written. I believe that there is a risk in relation to funding, but I don't believe that we can stay true to what elected members or as a council we have, we seek to deliver in terms of community engagement if we were to just endorse straight up, given the concerns around Hyde Park and potentially other routes. I think this is an incredibly lost opportunity, and I would just like to say that since I've been at the City of Vincent, one of the things that I consistently talk about is the engagement with elected members at an appropriate time. I think that if I was engaged on this earlier, I would have said, well, yes, we're in a state of flux. We don't have an integrated transport strategy or perhaps an accessible city strategy that has been adopted at this point in time, and we are at a point where our existing bike network plan needs a review, and we're aware of that. But I also think that we would have said that despite those limitations, that it would have been an opportunity to look at how we planned for our cycling in the city, and to make sure that we have some degree, and I know that there will probably end up being a lot of degree, but the synchronicity between what we have, you know, support as a long-term vision for cycling in Vincent and the Department of Transport. I recognise that they have a very challenging job to get, I believe it's 33 local governments, to get everything looked at and signed off. So this is not, I'm not criticising the Department of Transport in this, but I am saying that I think this is a real lost opportunity. I think that after September 2018, there would have been many opportunities that this process could have been brought to the attention of elected members, whether that was through a formal report to council, whether it was through just advice, whether it was through engagement with our advisory groups, just, you know, and then also that we would have been able to recognise that this is something that our community would have wanted to have meaningful input into. I will note that the city does provide commentary on a number of state level strategic documents. Tell me if I'm going over time. And generally my understanding that the Strategy and Development Directorate, that a request for comment or engagement on a particular document will be received. There will be a, some technical assessment provided by the administration, both of the broader document, but also about the specific elements contained within it. And that generally comes to a council meeting for us to endorse a response. And that part of that is that then the public, as part of the public record, get to see both what has been asked, but also that gets to see the technical assessment. And at this point in time, we've been asked to endorse a plan, but we have really not been, the public has not had an opportunity to see what discussions have been held over things like Charles Street, what discussions have been held over cycle networks, routes that are to be changed, and has not had the opportunity to read the office technical assessment on each of the routes. That's something that's been provided to me as a result of my questions at the briefing last week, but I don't think this process has actually adhered to the standard that I would expect, that and from experience that we would the process that we would follow at the City of Vincent for input into state level strategic planning documents. And I'm very upset about that, because I think that we have such a great cycling community in Vincent. We have, lived experience and expertise in this field in our community, and we have advisory groups of people who give their time to provide their input into things. So I'm very pleased that the recommendation has come forward and has been amended by administration. I do think that there's a risk, but I will support it in this instance. But I do think that we need to be honest about that. I think that this process has not really adhered to that community engagement or elected member engagement standards that I think that we should be aspiring to in Vincent.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. I'd just like to welcome Councillor Loden to the meeting. Thank you for joining us, Councillor Loden. And if you haven't already picked up on this, we are in the midst of 10.2 and we have been going for some time. I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that we're dealing with a revised recommendation from administration, which perhaps we could screen share because it has also had one amendment to it. It was emailed to council members this afternoon at 4:41 p.m. And it has just been amended so that we now have a new item, new clause 6, which is to request that the Mayor writes to the Minister for Transport, etc. It's on the page there. Hopefully you can see that.
Thank you.
Yep. So, Councillor Loden, you had your hand raised. Did you wish to speak?
No, that was just a clarifying.
Were you just saying hello?
I was just clarifying that I've got the updated one, and now I can see the amendment as well. So I'm all good.
All right. Okay, great. Councillor Fotakis.
I just wanted to commend Councillor Gontaszewski on being quite direct but quite measured. To say that I was disappointed in the whole process of this is a raw understatement. I was quite angry last week going through all of this, and I thought, You know, when I look back at the history in this city and the intensity that two members in this room fought for in 2014, and it wasn't a nice time for championing bike paths and the $2.5 million decision in July 2014. It wasn't a nice evening, that. There's newspaper reports that you can look it up. But what it did say to me is that bike paths and transport and manoeuvrability around our city are really important. That we've lost something. We've been game changers in this area for so long. Even last week, the issue that was raised that we should look to other councils sort of did lose the fact that we've been in this space fighting for bike paths for well over 6 years, really intensely. And I think we've actually brought the whole, the industry and local government, we've actually raised the bar a lot with the way that we address the importance of bike paths and particularly protected bike paths as well. And that's been a very, very difficult issue. So I think this whole process, very disappointed that we haven't taken our community along with us, because I have to agree with Councillor Gondaszewski, a very talented, skilled, they're out on the roads all the time. We have a very high usage of bikes in our city, and these are people that can really help inform these documents by personal experience. And I think for me to be expected to look at a document and endorse that without going to the community, that's just not me. So I wouldn't have been able to do this. So I'm really pleased to see that there's an amendment on that we support in principle, because otherwise I would not have been able to endorse this. I wouldn't have been able to say to my community that I want your comments, but we've already endorsed a document that there's so many problems in. And to look at the way that some of those paths are done with a direct cut through Hyde Park, it was raised very quickly last week without any consideration. Anybody that knows that park knows that it's not just a green area, and it's not just a part that's used by our residents today. It has a very important history with this city, and a very important link with our Indigenous community as a gathering place. And then to place a major route right through that park disrespects everything that the city has actually held quite valuable about that. So I'm sorry to get emotional about this, but I find this whole process so frustrating, particularly because we've got incredibly talented councillors in this room who add value. They just don't rubber stamp documents, intensely look at the detail of documents. And I think the outcomes of whenever these form of documents actually come through council, they do get intensely discussed. So apologies again to my colleagues for just getting a little bit emotional about this, but I'm happy to support it, but I just want it on the record that we can do better. And I'd like to see us do better in the future.
Thank you very much, Councillor Vatakis. Appreciate those very passionate comments, and it is a deep history that, well, it feels like a deep history because there were battles along the way. So I do really appreciate those comments and those perspectives. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken? I'm just trying to keep track of who's actually spoken because this has been going for a long time. Councillor Hallett.
I'll be quick. I won't repeat things that other people have said. I guess just concur with what's been said already, and deep disappointment, I guess, in the process. I don't want to give Department of Transport a free ride on this, though. I think that's an extraordinary response that a large number of councils were in that final group, and they only received this plan in three weeks ago, and are expected to endorse it with this timeline, and the idea that without that they would not be eligible for any bike funding for several years is appalling. So that's a bit crap. But also, and I guess the other point just in relation to community consultation, I really hope to see that consultation done meaningfully. I don't want it just on our website. We should be incredibly deeply engaged with our community on this. It's perfect timing with our ITP. I would expect it to be heavily integrated into our own planning for our bike network plan and RTP, and I hope if that's what we see.
Thank you. I think everyone has spoken other than Councillor Loden and myself. Just peering at you now, Councillor Loden. No, okay, wow, such restraint. Look, I just want to say that this is an important plan because it really affects funding, and so it is quite a critical document. This is not just something that we're sort of being asked to endorse. It doesn't have an impact on our bike network. It is really important, and I take your point, Councillor Hallett, about the time frame provided to us. I did ask the CEO to fact check this idea that we had to endorse in order to secure funding, because I haven't really come across this process before. It just actually seems incredibly unusual, and to say that that endorsement is required for funding, that's not even genuine consultation with us as a local government, let alone us consulting with our community. So the whole thing is quite strange. I absolutely take the point, Councillor Fotakis, that accessible city is one of our priorities under our strategic plan. We have a long, 6-year history. As I say, it seems like such a long time when you've been involved through what were battlegrounds on bike lanes, and still are. They're not easy. We've seen it recently on Carr Street. It's still something which we find is not always acceptable to everybody, and there's a lot of criticism around expenditure, etc. But we have been really prepared to push through that and know the value of providing cycling infrastructure, not just now but into the future along these corridors where development is going to expand. So I think that really the message from council to administration is, look, I acknowledge the tight timeframes from Department of Transport, so I'm putting that out there. But also I think that we don't want a disconnect forming between council priorities and having issues raised with us as early as possible. And if there is an issue with timing over something which is important, we need to know about it as quickly as possible so that we can act and respond. And yes, I think everything else has probably been said tonight, but I just did want to say that it is for me strange, and I think we also end up, when we have recommendations from administration that are so divorced from the direction that council has headed in, we end up on the front page of our local newspaper. And whilst that is, administration has to give frank and fearless advice and provide a recommendation, and it's open to us to accept or refuse, it does mean that where there is a disconnect, we're sort of backpedaling, and I'm receiving text messages from people telling me I'm mad and that this is terrible, and it just feels quite uncomfortable to be in that position when bike lanes is something that you have been prepared to consult deeply, widely, spend the money, go through the pain, and deal with abuse on Facebook, etc., to get through and support this. So I think that it's clear that it is important to us, and that we're really saying there needs to be more acknowledgement from administration on those critical issues, and maybe some further review of recommendations against our priorities and our values. That's all from me. Councillor Loden, are you sure? Everyone else has had a go. Amazing. Okay, I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Okay, so they were just the first 3 items raised by members of the public gallery this evening. So now I'm going to go back to the very beginning of the agenda. Councillor Loden, just for your benefit, the items that we have not yet dealt with are items 9.1, 9.3, 11.1, 11.5, 12.1, 12.3. Okay, so 9.1 is number 539 to 545, Beaufort Street, Mount Lawley, proposed mixed-use development amendment to approved. I did pull this one out, so yep, Councillor Gontaszewski. I do need a seconder. Councillor Toppelberg.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I will speak briefly to say that I am disappointed that a significant design feature of this development is unable to be implemented, but ultimately I accept the rationale. I note that there are other some other changes in terms of the approval, but I think, yeah, look, ultimately, I still think this is an approvable development with the constraints of the site that it's on. And I think that it will, once delivered, be a positive addition to the streetscape.
Thank you. Question just through you, Mayor Cole, to Mr. Naidu, the Manager of Planning and Development, I think. Design and Development, apologies. So recommendation 1.2, which is an amendment to condition 9.1, dot point number 5-2, which is the use of consolidated planters in the corners of balconies as opposed to individual planters. If I go to page 55 of the agenda, I think it is. Sorry, that's the locations. If we look at, sorry, it's page 75 of the agenda, which gives the size and dimension of the proposed planters. The word consolidation is the catch-all at the end of that to the satisfaction of the city, because I guess there was some concern raised around the curved nature of the original proposed planters and the belief for the some elected members' view of the design aesthetic that provided. This still has a curved element proposed at the corners, but is it specifically the two next to it and the one on the very corner that is proposed to be amalgamated? I just want to get clarity around what the actual consolidated planters and the effect of that, and how the applicant would or wouldn't comply with that condition, and whose ultimate decision that is.
Yes, through you, Mayor Cole, it is to the city's satisfaction. That is in the preamble of that condition, where that detailed landscaping and reticulation plan needs to be submitted to our satisfaction. All of those items that are thereafter listed need to be accounted for in that landscaping plan. So the city ultimately needs to be satisfied with the planters being consolidated. More specific to those planters to the corners, it's probably clearer on the landscaping plans that have been included as attachment number 4 to this item. And you'll see on the corner that they are separate. You'll see in red, for example, those separate planters. Now, the idea being to consolidate those to increase the opportunity to install greater planting. That's really the idea behind it. So that would also achieve a improved appearance in terms of that curvature that otherwise would have been provided in the previous proposal. So that's really the intention of it, requiring that condition and the consolidation of those planters.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, look, I just raised this issue because, again, we've come some distance on this between last Tuesday and this Tuesday night, and it is quite disappointing when you approve a development and it has that this was sort of mooted as a bit of a biophilic design. The trees were an incredible feature of this building. It really kind of made this incredibly exciting, I think, for residents living around it, and added to its acceptability in that it was 2 stories higher than the built form policy, etc. So I think that it was a little bit disappointing to see something which is of such significance to this design be lost. But I had my faith restored during the week when we were able to reach agreement with the applicant to bring back the trees. So when it came to the briefing, we were looking at having 34 on-structure trees, which was down from 58. And where we've landed is that we're actually going to end up with 59 trees in the landscaping plan. So, look, I do think that the design, I think that, you know, I've read all of the information provided back from the applicant about the fact that you'd have to probably grow a tree over 6 years to test the structural integrity of this proposed planter style that was put forward in the original DA. I think it's a shame that we perhaps didn't know that at the time that we were dealing with the DA. I think that information should have come forward and been presented as a risk, and that, you know, if that was not, that was potentially in question, that the structural engineering perhaps needed to come forward with something that was so unique and different. But ultimately, I'm very pleased that the tree numbers have been restored +1, and I think that that's fantastic compared to where this was sitting last Tuesday. So that's really why I brought it forward, because again, this was reported on as a development that was going to have a significant reduction in trees. But here we are at the council meeting, and we've actually restored that with the agreement of the applicant, showing the value of landscaping and canopy, not just landscaping, to us when it comes to development. Are there any further comments? To check down. Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, and declare it carried. Okay, the next item is 9.3, number 50 Barley Street, Mount Lawley, proposed single house, raised by Councillor Toppelberg. Do you wish to move this? Thank you. It's seconded by Councillor Hallett.
Thank you, Mayor Cole. I think this is a really good example of where, despite all the work over all of the years, that our built form policy doesn't explicitly explain why it is that this isn't an acceptable development outcome in the city. I think that's, if you look at the correspondence between the applicant and elected members and their contentions, it really is arguing technical points about setbacks, loft definitions, those sorts of things, rather than looking at the design and looking at the acceptability. So some of my key issues with it, whilst it technically meets the open space requirement, a lot of that open space is provided by the provision of 3 open sides, but it's actually sitting underneath effectively an awning, which is the upper floor, which means that whilst it's technically open space on site, there's no provision for planting, real access to light or otherwise. The only real space to provide planting is in the southern side of the property, which is effectively useless as far as growing things in our climate. So I think in each technical perspective, I will speak about the lot boundary setback, because there is reference to it. I'm not going to seek to delete as a condition of refusal, but I think that given its location, the fact that it abuts a property that directly fronts Roy Street and will be entitled to build with a boundary fence and a 1 metre setback to their property line, effectively, as you face the property to the right, there will be no boundary, and to the left is a laneway and then a 6 metre high building with nil setback. So I think that there's a very clear argument for a reduced street setback, but it's not just that absolute street setback, and what that means is that the overall presence of the building on the site and in the location. This isn't we're not design aesthetic subjective panel in what we do here, but the feedback that has been consistent, as I can see from the city's offices and from our design review panel, about the combined impact of the roof form, the materials chosen, the design itself. So with that unique style, it's not, it's, when I first looked at it, I thought it was almost a Queenslander, but it's not actually, because it has that strong, bulky built form just set back and squashed in underneath the balcony on the ground floor. It's not that sense of openness underneath, so it doesn't actually reflect an architectural style that I could identify. I don't think the roof form or the materials speak to any particular architectural style, or to the to me the architecture seems to have evolved as the best as I can understand it from on a needs basis. So want to have this size room, this size bedrooms, this many bathrooms, this much living space, a scullery,
and then it all just fits in. We need this much open space. Well, let's make the top floor overhang the bottom floor. It seems to be, or that, you know, we're not going to get 3 stories. We'll do it as a loft. So it doesn't seem to be something that's been designed in its context. It's more so to fulfil the needs of the internal floor space and the desired livability. The aesthetic, yes, there is a subjective view, but the consistent feedback from our officers and from our independent review panel is that the aesthetic doesn't develop an architectural language that is something that is consistent within the context of the streetscape, and for that reason, clause 67M of the provisions is listed as a reason for refusal. So I do hope that we, it seems from what I can read that the officers in the city have tried to engage further with the applicant and try and resolve some of these issues through discussion, but there seems to have been more of a desire to argue about technical meeting of definitions and what is a loft, what is a 3rd story, what is height, what is street setback, how does it relate to the right of way. The argument that the neighbours next door haven't provided sufficient planting space is effectively saying if you've got something bad built, everything next to it should therefore be able to be built poorly forever after, which doesn't hold with me either. I think there's a reasonable expectation that we will see some meaningful landscaping on site. So I will support the officer's recommendation as written.
Councillor Hallett?
Nothing to add.
Okay. Councillors, does anyone wish to speak to this? Look, I just want to say I really appreciate that you have brought this forward, and I think that it did require some commentary from council, because I think that when reading the applicant's letters, I know there's been a great attempt to keep the discussion continuing and for the applicant to take some advice from the DRP, and there have been some changes, but for me the design is incoherent and would require significant work for it to be acceptable, and I'm happy to say that and for the applicant to know that, because I think there is a real sort of misunderstanding between what the applicant's seeking to do and what the city's planning officers and the design review panel are feeding back. And for me, this would have a long way to go before it is approvable, not just on the technicalities, but in terms of actually having a design that works within that streetscape and that lot. The pitch of the roof form pitches, the as you say, the bulky underground ground floor. It's a very difficult design to tweak. I think it's something that I'd really appeal to the applicant to really listen to the feedback from the DRP, and perhaps rather than trying to continue to make minor tweaks, to actually really consider having a whole new look at what has been proposed. I know that feedback was probably difficult, and that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and I'm taking away the effort and care that has gone into this, but I think that we do need to be upfront and say that the design, as well as the discretion sought and the variations, are from my perspective, they're not acceptable, and there is a long way to go, not just tweaks. So I just wanted to be upfront. Is there any further comments? Okay, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? I declare it carried. Okay, that concludes strategy and development for the evening. You can rest easy from now on, manager, but yes, we don't even have an information bulletin to ask questions on. Anyway, sorry, I'm got to keep focused. Next item, 11.1. So we've actually concluded infrastructure and environment as well, and we're moving to community and business services. And the item is 11.1, petition Friends of Anzac Cottage. Moved by Councillor Toppelberg, seconded by Councillor Gontaszewski, and just noting that we are dealing with this because Councillor Castle has a financial interest and has left the room. Okay, Councillor Toppelberg, do you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I will actually, just to say that whilst we obviously have a role to play in terms of the cottage itself, what it means to a lot of people for a lot of reasons is significant, and that's there's obviously high emotion involved.
And I think that the city does have a role to play, but I also am conscious of what can eventually become deep-seated personality conflict or ideological disputes that may or may not be able to be resolved in the city, having to expend significant resources to try and be an intermediary. Ultimately, we are the custodians of the property itself, but I think it would, I know there's been some talk of some other potential avenues, but I think it would be good for all involved and for the memories that the cottage represents for so many people, for these disputes to be put to bed and for it actually just to be a place of calm and joy for the community rather than a source of conflict, and hopefully that can evolve very quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Gontaszewski. Does anyone else wish to comment? Look, very briefly, I would say that the city has gone to lengths to try to resolve the issues, to assist in resolving the issues between the two community groups, and it has sort of been occurring over a number of years. It's all documented in the report. The offer to continue to work with the two community groups stands. We've never walked away from that. We've always said we will continue to work with the parties where the willingness is there. But I think that the ultimate point here is that what the petition seeks from the city is not legally possible for us to do. So the offer remains for us to continue to work with the parties. I'm deeply appreciative of the community engagement work that the Friends of Anzac Cottage have conducted and grown. Even over the last 6 years of my involvement in council, I've seen that work grow, and that's been amazing. But we can't fix everything unless others are necessarily willing to come to the party, but our offer remains on the table, and our best, you know, for the best interest of the community and our you know, focus on the cottage and it's an incredible history. I think that will continue to grow. It should be probably known about throughout Australia because it is so unique. So that has got to be the priority, and we hope that that given we've given a very clear answer about what we can and cannot do, that perhaps we can get the parties back together and get the cottage being the focus again. Okay, any further comments? Put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Just wait for Councillor Castle to come back. Okay, the next item is 11.5, the differential rating strategy for 2020-21. Does anyone wish to move this? Oh, it's good. Choices. Councillor Castle, you can just sit down. Would you like to be the seconder or would you like to move it? Okay. I'm a bit not sure what to do now. You can move it, and Councillor Gontaszewski, you can second. Yes, we need a decision.
Okay, thank you. I'll just find it in my agenda first. What number is it? 11.5? Yeah. Look, happy to support this, the councillor recommendation. Obviously, as we know, this is a very difficult year to be setting a budget and to be releasing our rate setting statement, particularly not only because of COVID-19 restrictions and the economic impact that we're feeling and that our businesses are feeling as a result, but also the added complication of a GRV re-evaluation this year. That's added some volatility to the rates that our residents and our businesses will be receiving, and it has been quite a challenge to try and address that and maintain the commitment that we made to keep our rate yield at a 0% increase. I did want to ask a question in relation to the hardship provisions, and at the briefing last week I asked for an addition to the report around further hardship provisions that might be provided to people who are unable to pay their rates. And the in the notes it was pointed out that we actually don't have the power to completely waive rates. So I just have a question around whether we can investigate other mechanisms to offer relief for residents or businesses who have genuine financial hardship and might be unable to cover the entire rate bill.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Cole. So we have a couple of different scenarios. So when it comes to residents who may be in financial crisis, we've got a number of things that we can do in terms of assisting them immediately with their rates obligation. And we will work with the community to try and make that as effective as possible and sort of assist them to tap into state and federal government funds that are available in a hardship situation. And just to pick up on Councillor's comments there, we are also looking at a couple of other options that we will bring to the table in due course. It's a little bit different in a commercial and business setting. So we're also looking at what are the hardship provisions or the payment processes that we can put in place. Because we may be dealing with a tenant or we may be dealing with a landlord in a particular scenario. So we're currently looking at the water corporations protocols that they use for hardship provisions in a business setting, and we're just currently revising those at the moment. So in summary, yes, we're definitely looking at a number of different options and trying to explore as many as we can so that we can be there for our community at this time.
Councillors, look, I just wanted to raise this because it, as you know, it has been. Oh, sorry, Councillor Gonchevsky, you didn't want to speak to it. Yep. So basically, it has been an incredibly challenging set of circumstances that we're sort of budget setting in, and as a result, when we're putting out this rate setting statement for 21 days of advertising, we generally want to engage with the community on this. We're going to be setting up FAQs and actually trying to explain what this means. It is very challenging to explain the complexities of GRV revaluation in the context of our budget situation, which has been significantly impacted by COVID-19. I think during budget setting for 2021, we have been talking about forecast reduction in revenue of around the $10 million mark. We still have probably a month before adopting the budget. So I think that's being, where we land in a month's time. This is a very fast moving set of circumstances. So whether we see some improvement, I don't know. But when you look at the fact that we have a request from state government to have a 0% increase in rates, fees and charges, we have been asked to reduce the amount of interest charged on rates being paid in instalments, which we're very, very happy to do and completely understand why. But then dealing with a GRV revaluation year where there's significant fluctuations in gross rental values, and then saying, well, look, whilst the city is committed to having a 0% increase in rates yield, that volatility for individual rate payers is there. And I think it's about us explaining that and actually trying to inform residents that this is the set of circumstances we face. This is why we can't simply reduce our rates yield by what would cost 2.7 million, you know, if we actually did reduce rates to try to compensate for the GRV, on top of losing $10 million in revenue, we would be severely restricted in running our services and operation for the benefit of our community. So it's about trying to put the circumstances as clearly as possible to the community and trying to explain why there will be some fluctuation in rates. There has been an attempt to deal with commercial ratepayers in a way that's slightly different to residents, and that needs some explanation, and that will be dealt with in terms of the communications around this. And I think that in terms of dealing with this, we've been really clear that we need to introduce some new hardship provisions that make this easier for people who have been impacted. So it's great to see rates smoothing for the first time, because otherwise, up until this point, we've talked about it in the past, but we've only been able to do payment of rates in 3 instalments with interest. So we're now looking at rate smoothing, where ratepayers will be able to pay fortnightly, which I think will help a great deal. And we've, as mentioned, we've reduced interest payments, and we will be looking at more hardship provisions. So the report recommendation talks about administration providing further advice to council on potential funding of up to $250,000 when finalising the budget to support the city in responding to ratepayers in financial crisis. And we've sort of said, well, that figure is not dissimilar to the increase in rates that we've seen through growth, through new dwellings coming on stream in 1920, so that the rates that would be received by the City of Vincent would be identical to the rates that were received this financial year. So a challenging set of circumstances, quite tricky to communicate, but we're going to do our absolute best to have some really good communications around this, genuinely consult with the community. This is a draft rating strategy for advertising for comment, so we feel it's important to put the right information around that so that people can actually engage with this meaningfully and understand what the impacts are and provide their feedback to us. So as part of advertising the differential rating strategy, it's not going to be an ad in a paper, it's going to be communicated via social media. We will have our Imagine Vincent consultation page set up with information and the ability for people to provide their feedback either that way or through other channels. So just wanted to provide a bit of context. Any further comments? The CEO would like to say something.
Through you, Mayor Cole, just to comment briefly that we have been advised that WALGO is commencing a statewide campaign to help educate the community about rates and the context of the rates freezing and the pending revaluations across the metro area, and that'll commence this weekend.
Be interested to see that. Okay. All right, so unless there are any further comments, I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Thank you. Okay, item 12.1, annual review of council delegations and proposed amendments to the execution of documents policy. This is an absolute majority decision item. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Anyone? Councillor Castle and Councillor Hallett, thank you. You don't wish to speak to it, Councillor Hallett? Any comments?
Happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, I'll put it all those in favour. Declare it carried. It was explored rather well at the briefing. Item 12.3, outcomes of advertising and adoption of new policies, elected members, continuing professional development policy, council proceedings, recording and web streaming policy and risk management policy. This is another absolute majority decision item. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? Move Councillor Fotakis, seconded Councillor Wallace.
I'm happy with, there were a few wordsmithing that went on during the week following last week's briefing, so I'm happy with where we're sitting with the recommendation, happy to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Vtakis. Councillor Wallace. Okay, does anyone wish to ask any questions or make any comments? Okay, I'll put it. All those in favour? Declare it carried. Okay, I think we're done. Let me just double check I'm not missing anything. I think we've dealt with all of the items of business this evening. So just in relation to the other items here, item 13, motions of which previous notice have been given, there is nil. 14 questions by members of which due notice has been given, there are nil. We have dealt with item 15, which was representation on committees and public bodies already. Item 16, urgent business, I believe there is nil. There are no confidential items, so I'm going to declare the meeting closed at 10 minutes past 8. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for anyone streaming from home.